Great. Welcome, everyone. Today's our first in our Writing with APA series, our first workshop on APA citation. This is a presentation brought to you by the Academic Success Center. Today, I will be your workshop facilitator. My name is Jackie Jordan. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an academic support specialist at the center. Let's start off in a good way. RRC Polytech campuses are located in the lands of Anishinaabe, Iniwak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. So, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about why do we cite? What is APA? How do we cite? And where can we find more information? So, let's jump straight in. Why do we cite? There's different reasons for why we cite, and predominantly it's to meet academic integrity expectations as a writer. By citing, we respect the work of others. By citing, we give credit when using others' work. And by citing, we avoid plagiarism. Another reason for why a writer might cite is to establish credibility. It allows you to back up your ideas and your knowledge by referring to what others have said, specifically if they're specialists or authorities on a topic. Well, let's look at the other perspective. Why do we cite? Well, it's also really helpful for the reader. When you cite, you provide an opportunity for the reader to follow up on the references, to go and find those sources of information so that they can read more on that topic. It also allows you to present the reader with an opportunity to establish the validity of your interpretation of what someone else has said. It also allows you to give an opportunity to the reader to identify which parts of the writing is yours and which parts come from others. So what is APA? APA stands for the American Psychological Association. So essentially, they've created this guide, and now it has become so commonly used across the globe. And it is at its currently at its 7th edition. So there's previous editions before that, and the most current is the 7th edition. And that's what we're going to walk you through today, because most instructors will expect that you're using the most current edition. So what does APA talk to us about? Well, it is essentially a guide for providing in-text citations, references, formatting, language, and style. So giving guidance on what this should look like. It's also a manual sharing expectations of what these things should look like. So let's look at this in practice. So here we have an excerpt from a sample paper. In the sample paper, we can see some of the formatting requirements related to APA, but we're not going to get into that today. That will be one of our later workshops in this Writing with APA series, so please do join us for the formatting workshop if that's something you're interested in. So let's look at the in-text citations. This is a sample paper from the APA style website. It shows us the introduction of a paper. And as you can see, there are some yellow highlighted text. So if we go to the first yellow highlighted text, I can read the sentence out. A majority of Americans experience stress in their daily lives. Parenthesis, American Psychological Association, comma, 2017. End of parenthesis, period. So what we see there is an in-text citation. If we move further down into the paragraph, we see another yellow highlighted text. So following another sentence, we have parenthesis, McGuigan and Leher, comma, 2007, parenthesis, end of parenthesis, and a period. So we have then another in-text citation. What you can notice with these in-text citations is that there is a author element followed by a date element. And this is key for understanding APA. And we'll come back to that shortly. So now let's look at these in-text citations and these sources in a little bit more detail. If we go to the end of the sample paper, we will find a list of references. If we look at the second reference entry, that is the one that we saw in text, the American Psychological Association 2017. So what I really want to highlight here is that we have a corresponding reference entry to what was found in our paper, in the text of our paper. So we have an in-text citation, which just provides the author and date element, followed at the end of the paper by a reference entry that provides a little bit more detail beyond the author and date. We'll go into more information about reference entries and how to build these in our next workshop next week, Thursday. So please join us for that to get the second part of our citing and referencing discussion. But today we're really going to focus on the in-text citing. So what you might have gained from that quick overview of a sample paper using APA is that APA is an author date style. These are the most important parts that always need to be shown within your writing when we are giving credit to someone else's work. We need to acknowledge the author and the date. And we'll expand on a little bit more about what that looks like later on. So these elements are what we use to cite in the text, and these elements form the beginning of a reference entry. And this is because then the reader can easily find the reference entry by knowing who was the author and what was the date of that source. So the in-text citation guides the reader to the reference entry and finding more information about that source. So APA is essentially a twofold process. So as a student, if you provide in-text citations, but you don't provide a reference entry, then you've not adhered to APA. And you could raise academic misconduct concerns. So you always want to make sure that you have this twofold process, that you have in-text citation with a corresponding reference entry. So let's talk about in-text citations. In-text citations are in line with the text. In your paper, they are within the essay, they are in line. They are a short version of the source. As you saw, the reference entry had the longer version of the source, more information, whereas the in-text citation just had the author and date. The in-text citations allow for easier reading, and they are provided anytime you use information from a source. So they indicate to the reader that this information comes from the source. So how do we cite? When writing in APA, you need to include a citation for every piece of information or idea that was taken from an outside source. What are sources? So sources are when something comes, it means where something comes from. In this case, a source in this term is a source of information. So when we refer to sources in this context, it's a source of information. This slide shows us that there are different types of sources. The green highlighted boxes are the sources that are most commonly used by students. So here we've got journal articles, web articles, and news articles highlighted. But in your course, you might use PowerPoint lecture notes, or you might also use books or interviews. So it really depends on the discipline, but most commonly students will use journal articles, web articles, and news articles in their writing. Okay, so I always get asked, what does using information from other sources look like? Well, anytime summarize, paraphrase, or quote, you need to provide an in-text citation because you are using information from another source. So if you're summarizing someone else's work, taking an idea and putting it in your own words, paraphrasing, or using someone else's exact words and ideas, quoting, then you need to cite. So for more information on using information from sources, such as how to paraphrase, please see our workshop series, our writing workshop series called Building Your Writing Foundation. The workshop recordings and tip sheets are available on the ASC website. Does an in-text citation change based on how I'm using information? So if I'm paraphrasing, summarizing, or quoting, does the in-text citation look the same or does it differ? Well, when you're summarizing or paraphrasing, the in-text citation just includes the author and date element. However, if you are quoting, you will need to include location element. So in addition to author and date, you also need to include the location. Where did you find this quote in the source? Was it on page 1, page 10, paragraph 5, paragraph 11? So that's really important for quotations to include the location information. Otherwise, just summary and paraphrase, you just use author and date in your in-text citation. Now, let's quickly look at an example. Here we have a web article, and I just want to draw your attention that we have an author, we have a date, right, December 1st, 2021 by Moodle. We have the title, we have a URL link. So we have quite a bit of information that we can use to generate an in-text citation as well as a reference entry. But we're just going to focus on the in-text citation today. So let's look at a sample paraphrase. Over here, we've paraphrased from the text, and the real focus is just that we have now included a parenthetical in-text citation at the end of the sentence with the author element and the date, with a comma between those elements. Now, if we use the same source but quoted from that text, this is what it would look like. We have our own words to begin the sentence, and then we indicate the beginning of a quote by using quotation marks, then indicate the end of a quote by the final quotation marks, and then we see the parenthetical in-text citation, and we see author, comma, date, comma, location element. Here we've got the abbreviated form of paragraph or APA. This is how you would write paragraph. And we're saying, we found this in paragraph 1. Okay. Is there another way to cite in text? So you might have heard me use the term parenthetical in-text citation. So a parenthetical citation form is simply when we use parentheses and put the author and date elements within those parentheses, or another common term is brackets to understand parentheses. So we use brackets and include author and date within those brackets. So this is called the parenthetical citation form. And here you see an example of it with a paraphrase and a quote. Now let's look at if there is another form. And there is. An alternative citation form is the narrative citation form. So in this instance, the author element is in the text. It is not in parentheses, but the date remains in parentheses. And it's usually followed by a reporting verb. Let's look at some examples. So here we have the author, Cola, brackets or parentheses, 2016, noted, and went on with our idea. Here we see an example for a quote. We have the authors, Irvin et al., and I'll explain that shortly in a slide or two. And brackets 2018, end of brackets, emphasized that effective teams can be difficult to describe because quotation marks, high performance along one domain does not translate to high performance along another, end of quotation marks. And do you notice that after the quotation marks is where we then put the location element? We have page, P stands for page, 470 in parentheses. So for quote, we had the author in narrative in the actual text, then we had the date in parentheses and the page number in parentheses, but just in different places in the sentence. Okay, so if you want to understand or see more examples of reporting verbs, please follow the link on this webpage. So let's quickly talk about some in-text citation examples. On the slide, there's a very helpful graphic from APA-style website. And over here, we can see if we have one author, so the source that you're referring to, it only has one author that wrote it. We, in parenthetical citation form, would just put the single author by their last name. I forgot to mention that, that's very important. We only use the family name or last name, surname, whatever term you want to use for the author in the in-text citations. So last name followed by date. As you can see, we have the example also for the narrative citation form. If it's two authors, we put the first author's last name and the second author's last name. Notice that we use the symbol ampersand, which is the symbol for and, within the parenthetical citation form. Whereas in the narrative, we use the actual word and instead of the symbol. So as you saw in that previous example, we had an et al. This means that there were 3 or more authors. So in the in-text citation, we don't put all 3 or more authors' last names in the actual citation. We just put the first author's last name, followed by the Latin abbreviation and others, et al. So notice it's ET space AL, period, and a comma, and then the date element. So this is telling the reader that Martin and others, and then the date. Do you see that in the narrative form, we don't have the comma, but we do still use the period? Another example is with the group author that we have an example of over here. So National Institute of Mental Health. We've also got a group author without an abbreviation, such as Stanford University. So you can always use an organization or institute as author, as we saw in that sample paper, the very beginning of today's workshop, the American Psychological Association, where we used the association name as the author element. So sometimes when an institute or organization has a really long name, you can use the abbreviation. But first you have to introduce the abbreviation in the in-text citation. So here's an example. National Institute of Mental Health, square brackets, the abbreviation for this is NIMH, close square brackets, comma, 2020. So as a reader, I know that if I then see subsequently after this, NIMH, I know what it stands for. So over here in the narrative form, do you see that we don't use the square brackets because we have the National Institute of Mental Health outside of the parenthesis. Okay, so again, you don't have to know this off by heart. These things are available online. So it's just about having this awareness of the different expectations and what it looks like. But you can always go to the APA style website, click on this link, and then see the examples. Oh, and get a reminder. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is what the punctuation looks like. This is how the parenthesis looks like. So don't always feel that you have to know APA and the different formatting elements off by heart. Okay, so sometimes there's a missing element. What do we do in these cases? Well, APA again provides us with a really great table with some examples of what you would do if you did not have that. So if all elements are present, right, we have our author, year, citation. This is the parenthetical form, and this is our narrative form. However, if there's a source that doesn't have an author, then we would use the title in place of the author element. So here you see parenthesis, title, comma, year, title in the in-text narrative form, parenthesis, year. If there is no date, then APA says you should write N.D, which stands for no date. So here we have an example, author, comma, N.D. end of parenthesis. Again, similar for the narrative form, author, parenthesis, N.D. end of parenthesis. Okay, and this last one is more relevant to your reference entry, so we're not going to focus on that today. Okay, so sometimes a source might not have a page number. Then what do you do? Well, APA has given us, again, a very helpful graphic of some of the different abbreviations or different location elements you can provide to give the reader a sense of where this information is coming from in the source. So if you do not have page number, or if you want to show a page range, so that if you're paraphrasing and this idea was discussed across more than one page, you can use a page range. Notice that it's a double P for page range. You could use a chapter. You could also use a paragraph number. And really a paragraph number, specifically with web articles, where often you won't have page numbers. A paragraph number was something that you just simply count from the beginning of the page to where it is that you found your information. So just count out the paragraphs, paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, and then put that as your paragraph number. Again, there's more information on various location elements, so you can always click on this link to find this information. So I keep on talking about where can we find more information? So you might already have a sense of what the answer is to this question. And the answer is our online resource, which is the APA style website. It is really a helpful resource, and it is from APA itself. So it is as current as APA's 7th edition, and it's once you get familiar with it, it's quite easy to navigate. But there is a lot of information on the website. So we want to just highlight that for today's discussion, you would click on Style and Grammar Guidelines, and as soon as you do, it will open a menu. And the key thing that we spoke about today was in-text citation. So that's where you want to go to find out more about some of the things that we discussed today. And here's that web page that would open up once you clicked on in-text citations. It gives you some more information on principles, parenthetical versus narrative, quotations, paraphrasing, secondary sources, appropriate level of citation, personal communications, a whole range of further information. So, in summary, today we spoke about how citing your sources is important for the writer, and for the reader. And when you cite a direct quotation, we spoke about how a location element needs to be included in the in-text citation. We also highlighted how APA Online or the APA style website is a great resource for navigating and figuring out the different requirements for different source types and when you have missing elements. So today's workshop was brought to you by the Academic Success Center. Our next workshop on Thursday, March 6th, will be using the same WebEx link and will be on the topic of references. The Academic Success Center is there to provide you with a range of supports through your journey as a student at Red River College Polytechnic. Please go to our website to find all the different kinds of resources available to you as a student. If you have any questions or would like to touch base on any of the ideas or concepts I mentioned today, please feel free to email me at jjordan@rrc.ca. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to end the recording now and have time for questions.